So hey guys, it's been a while. If you look at the calendar, damn, it's almost September. But finally I can cut a few minutes out and just give you a look at the DGUS-Reloaded for CR6 Klipper interface running on the stock thin film transistor TFT display. So you can decide whether you want to give her a shot. It's now at the state where I consider it stable enough for general use. It is my daily driver, but of course I can reach in and tweak code if it throws me an error, which you may or may not be willing to do. So take it under advisement. It may or may not give you grief. I'd like to know, because I know what I could try to do to fix it. But as far as I can tell, this is now working. It's laid out in the same button arrangement as the CF6.1 refactored community display. You should recognize the graphics and the color scheme. Not all the functionality is implemented. It's not necessarily in the same place, but I followed the spirit of it, and where it's at now, it's going to take on a life of its own. I wanted the learning curve to be at least reduced by your knowledge of the community firmware, if that's what you have. So it follows the same layout. You should start with setup when you're first arranging your machine. Go to calibrate when you're ready to level it and run PID. I do not have E-steps implemented yet. You'll have to use the console interface for that. Prepare is the same deal, changing filament, managing your heaters, that sort of thing, getting the machine ready to go. And print right now can only print the last thing you printed. So it has memorized, in this case, the name of the last thing I printed. It will memorize the name of the thing you choose to print from the Mainsail front end, and then after that you can come back here and say do it again, do it again, do it again, if that's what you like. Right? I'd like to figure out how to give it full access to the files that are on there, but right now I'm having grief where Jinja 2 template, for those who know, seems unwilling to look at the operating system object and read the files there, so I have to find someone who's done it before or get some help from someone out there in the community to get around that obstacle. And until then I cannot browse like you can on the CF6.1. But it's on my to-do list. So setup right now gets you into setting up the brightness of the display. Right, the usual, you 100%, 10%, or tap on it and choose a value like 50% and it'll respond right away. You can turn the LED on the printer on and off, and I have set it up now so that if you do that in some other way, like say through the Mainsail interface, this light will still show the correct status. So when you see the red button, you know the light has been commanded on. Same deal with the runout sensor. I made a bit more of a noise with that one because I made a habit of running my machine with the filament sensor installed and enabled, but not running the filament through it, and it started giving me grief. So I've programmed it for my needs, and you just get it or bypass it as you choose. But if you launch a print and you have your filament sensor enabled like this, and there's no filament in the sensor, it will abort it'll pause the print and ask you, basically by presenting the head to the front end and pausing, it's asking you, do you want to continue, which you can just say resume and away it'll go, or it's giving you the opportunity to go to the tune menu and change the filament and actually run it through the filament sensor, or you have the option of disabling the sensor at any point in the print process. So a lot of complication there. But I also programmed this version to remember what we chose here. So whether you enable it here or somewhere else, or you disable it somewhere else, there's a variable now stored that's persistent from one switch on to the next that retains knowledge of the last commanded state, and it'll bring it back to that state next time you restart. Now what I'm going to do here is disable it to prove that point later. Klipper will normally enable your sensor if you have said pause at runout equals true in your printer config. And it wasn't giving me a choice, so I've overwritten that. I have modified the macros to restore the last state that you've commanded with that button instead. Okay, so that's set up. If we go to Calibrate, I have bed leveling and I have pid tuning. So pid tuning first. It's the same as the CF1 in philosophy. You set the temperature that you want to do the pid for. It defaults to 210. You can pid the bed here, unlike with the CF6-1. We've implemented bed pid, same deal. It starts with the PLA default temperature that assumes that's what you want, but you're welcome to tap the value, change it to anything you like 80, 110, and then go ahead and pid that. And whichever way you go, when you say start, it'll actually give you a screen that says which thing you're doing a pid on and at what temperatures. The factors here are the current factors before you start pid. I have not figured out how to make it update those values after running the pid, because until you commit those values to your config, they're not actually in the objects, and the objects are what we're displaying here. So save config right there. When it completes the pid, if you do that, then next time you access the screen you'll see the new values, but I would have liked to have been able to show you the difference, and right now I can't. Come out of there, we go into bed leveling. There are 3 options here on bed leveling. Strangely enough, manual bed leveling was already there in the software that I ported here. I have kept it. It will home the printer. Just pausing because I'm not sure it should. Yes, it's okay. So it will home the printer first because it wants to know where Z is when you get started. But as you push each of the icons, I hope this isn't ugly, but I put little turning wheels in each of the 4 corners, and I labeled the center of the bed to be the center. Whichever one you push, it will take Z down to where it thinks is Z equals 0. If you see a gap between Z equals 0 and your bed, your offset is too high. Okay? The offset is supposed to compensate for the fact that it triggers the probe on a bed detection after actually passing 0. And the offset is how much to move back again to be at 0. This business of paper tests and 0.20 above it is all antique noise and is not relevant to this printer. People do it anyway, they get away with it, so people think it's okay, but it's not right. What's right is the nozzle is touching the bed at Z equals 0. So I've given you the option of using the G-code Z offset function to baby step the nozzle down to the bed when it should be at 0 but is not, and that readout will give you an estimate of how far off your offset is. But if you were to push each of the buttons in turn, it'll go to each of the corners. If you did retrofit wheels, and some people have, you can use that opportunity and level all 4 corners to the same standard, whatever that be. If it's paper, then so be it. If it's a shim, that's even better. Using a shim then lets you subtract the known value of the shim from the offset that you get in the end to bring it back to 0. But that's what that layout is for. And you can, by the way, you change the bed temperature if you wish, so that you are doing your leveling at temperature if that's your desire, because it does warp the bed. And there is an Easter egg in here that I'm not advertising anywhere else, but if you tap the icon, say the bed icon, it will 0 the target temperature. The same thing is true for the nozzle. If you have a target temperature, it's a quick cool down option. No matter what screen you're on, it'll do that on every single screen. And while I'm speaking of every single screen, this exclamation mark with what's meant to be a brake symbol, right? A wheel with 2 calipers on it. That is an emergency stop button, an M112 code. As long as you have not lost communication between the LED and the host, when you push that, it'll do an emergency shutdown no matter what screen you're on. But if you have lost communications, it can't. You'll still see a display, but the host won't see it. So that's a word of caution here. It's not quite like the CF6-1, although in that case, if you lost the communication interface, it also wouldn't respond. But here, I have sometimes reached for that emergency in a panic because my head's descending into the bed and it's done nothing for me, and I would have been better off powering off. So just a word of caution, that emergency stop there will only work if the interface is still communicating. On the corner of any screen you can exit, there's a little arrow, and I put a touchpad right over the arrow. If you try to tap over here, it's not going to work, but sometimes you have to tap several times because I made the pad rather small. So I'm back at here now. I've done the manual leveling. Let's take you into automatic leveling. I do not have color coding on the pads yet. Getting control over DGUS to the stage where I know which address to place which value to get what color is not something I've sat down and studied yet. Trying to stabilize the interface before I get into the fancies. But I can, at some point, start researching that. It's on my to-do list. For now, what I've done here is, top left corner is run ABL. When you push that, it'll run the bed leveling. It will populate this grid, and it will call it default profile. So in Klipper, you name your mesh profiles. Default is one of the names you can use. It's the only name that the Klipper load and remove functions was willing to accept from me. Someday, I want to find a way around that limitation as well. I tried a lot, lost a lot of time, did not yet succeed, but I want to figure out how to load any profile you name, modify it here, and if I wish to save it, and remove it if I wish to remove it. But right now, I can only do that for default. If you get into the Klipper configuration files, the machine files that I load up with this Klipper on the repository, default is not one of the values that I use unless I want to run the bed cold. So let's say default profile in my printer config and my start print macro means cold bed. And that's not always what you're going to want to do. So I have macros in my Klipper macro config files that let me run ABL at 60C, let me run ABL at 80C, and then when I'm printing, it looks at the bed target temperature, and if it's over 50, it says, oh, you must be going for PLA. But if it's over 70, it says, oh, no, it's PET-G you want. And it loads the 80 for the PET-G and it loads the 60 for the PLA automatically. A lot to absorb. You may have to play that back slowly. But what you see here is presently there is no mesh profile loaded into Klipper's memory at all. If I want to load a profile, I can click on load profile, and the default profile, that's why the word default is there, that's the name of the profile, has now been loaded, and you can admire the numbers that I have achieved. In truth, some of those numbers are slightly off. I'm getting a little bit of too close to the bed on the front left corner still. But I cannot tap these numbers to change them right now. That is an array that you're looking at. It treats all the values as a single variable name. Also on my to-do list is to eventually implement an individual object for each of those mesh positions, so that again I can get control of their color, their appearance, their size, whatever it is I want to do to them. Today it's an array of values. You must use 5x5 bed mesh matrix with this. In your printer config it has to be defined as 5x5 or this software will not function. It's hard-coded dumb that way. It's how I got it. Haven't yet gained enough mastery of Python to make that a variable according to your config. If anybody wants to help, hint hint. So if you don't like the results, let's say you get a mesh and it looks for all the world like there's a slant on the X. You will want to disable steppers in order to slide your head around and test that theory. That's why there's a disable steppers button here. It's for the next thing you might want to do, not for running the ABL itself. Home all, same deal. If you have disabled steppers, you're going to have to home your printer. So the home all is there if that's the next thing you want to do while you're on this page. Right? And if you like the mesh you have and you want to keep it, you can say save configuration. It will put it in your printer config and it will reboot the machine. It'll be called default profile if you go looking for it. If you did that by mistake or you have regrets, you can push remove profile. It will take it away from memory, and then you can say save config and it'll actually take it away from printer.config. There's me trying to find that corner. So the last thing is Z offset. This one's kind of cute. If you listen carefully, you still won't hear my fan noise anymore. I had a hot end cooling fan with a bad bearing, some crud accumulated on the blades in the way of dust and dirt, and it vibrated and hummed very nicely, so that when I lowered the nozzle to touch the bed plate, I could hear a distinct change of tone that told me I was at Z=0. Good news, bad news, I swapped out the fan now. It's dead silent. I love this dead silent printer, but the bad news is I can no longer use that trick to find Z=0. So I'm going to be back to shimming like the rest of you guys, using a feeler gauge and then subtracting the value to get to 0. So home XYZ is the first step in the Z offset function. Right now I've done that already, and it's sitting at 10 millimeters above the deck. The next thing you want to do is push lower to Z=0, and that actually lowers the head right down until the head is just at where Z=0 in the data, in the profile. Then you can use, you may recognize the offset baby step function. You can choose whether it's steps of 0.01 or steps of 0.1. You can up and down, right? You can take an entire 0.1 of a millimeter off the height, and my little blue lights come on. You can't see that, but if I go back up, it's back to 0. God bless it, my little blue light's still on because there's probably a hysteresis involved. If I go there and I went up 0.01, suddenly the light went out again. That does suggest I was a little too close to the bed, because it'll be, well, the offset I had was around 0.08 originally, so it's probably a little too close to the bed right now. But there you go, there is that function. It will help you get Z offset to exactly where you want it, and then you can press save config and it'll store it in printer config forever, or until you change it again. So I'm just going to home so that I'm not sitting there with pressure on the nozzle. I'm doing all of this looking at just the screen. I will go back and show you the machine itself to add some B-roll to this film and get you a full story. So that's leveling and PID tuning. Those are the only calibration functions I've implemented on this version. Prepare gives you the options of changing the filament. So I have set it up where you can choose the temperature you want, okay? If that's what you want to do. Whoops. 2, 1, look at the 0, there you go. Right, you can choose the one you want, or configured in the software, hard-coded, not intuitive where you would find it. I can tell you where to find it, but it's not intuitive where to find it. There are pre-programmed values for 3 filament types. You can substitute in your head if you're using a different one but you think it's the same temperatures. Those are the 3. Like if you want to use ASA instead of ABS, it's probably similar. If you push any one of those, it automatically now changes both the nozzle and the bed temperature. So remember that Easter egg. If you don't want to see the bed temperature change right now, tap the bed icon, it will go back to 0. But anytime you use material presets, it will set both to the default values. ABS would be, in this case, 90 and 240. And PET-G would be 80 and 225. So you can find those in init.py under T5UID1 folder. When you're able to find that, you'll know how to open it in a text editor and change those numbers. Okay? But that's the default behavior for most of it. You can always tap on there and change it if you don't like the number, but it's to get you into the ballpark for changing filament, really. So I've told it 180 is enough to release the filament, so once you get to above 180 on the nozzle, you can actually go ahead and push unload. So to unload a particular, or load a particular length of filament. If you don't like 150, you know, maybe you have a Bowden and you don't have a direct, 200 is the most I've allowed it to say. If you don't like that, you can figure out how to change it. If you need to ask me, go ahead and ask me. But you can make it anything smaller than 200. Hey, I have a direct drive machine. I don't want to be piling filament into my bed and wasting it, so I've limited where it goes. And unload and load is simply means take it out of the printer, put it into the printer, right? So you can move the heads again if you prefer to, like I do, load filament from the front corner and not from the center of the bed, so you're not piling wet filament into the middle of your print bed. I like to home XY first. I print it off the corner of the bed onto the frame, and then I cool the nozzle until it's gone hard, and then I snap it off the end of the nozzle. So move is kind of intuitive. Move is when you want to move the heads around, right? It'll show you where they are last commanded to be, right? It's not a readout of exactly where is it right now. The display is only updated every 2 seconds. It'll tell you where it has now been commanded to go, and you can watch it physically get there or not. If you see a discrepancy between where it was commanded to go and where it appears to be, something's gone wrong and you'll need to restart. So you get to choose whether it's a 0.1 millimeter move, a 1 millimeter move, or a 10 millimeter move. Default is 10. Each time you push a button, it does have to be homed before it'll know what you mean, but I can take set up fairly safely. It goes from 10 to 20 because I told it to, right? And you still have to wait for it to stop moving before it's there. If you disable steppers, your machine no longer knows where it is. You'll notice it doesn't give you any feedback. It doesn't give you any change in position. But if you try to move it now, it says, hey, you'll have to home it because I have no idea where you're at. Right, so that's what disable steppers is there, so you can physically push the bed where you want it, drag the nozzle head where you want it, turn the screws by hand to raise that. But if you want to do it by machine, with this screen, you have to start by homing everything or being homed already. It does test whether you're already homed when it comes to follow these commands. So if you were to disable steppers on some other screen, it would still know that it is no longer aware of where you are, and it would still say, hey, you need to. Okay, so you can tap any one of those things if you want to move the head the easy way. Just put it where you want it. Fairly intuitive. If you have questions for me, by all means post them. Disable steppers just did that. On my fingers, big fat thumb, that disabled stepper, you hear the brake let go. Manage heaters is about exactly that, the nozzles in the bed. It tells you what the maximum available setting is in your printer configuration for each of these temperatures. So if you change that number from 305 to something else, your number will appear here, not mine. Okay, but you can change this to whatever you like, and if you try to go beyond the limits, it will only go to the limit. It will go, but it won't let you go as high as you put it. Okay, that's a safety feature, so we assume that max is true when you say max is whatever. Okay. Same thing with the 110, by the way. I'll show you the other feature as well. If you go to 60, because that's what you want, it's the exact same thing as tapping down there and saying 60, but if you tap this icon, it will go to 0 in both places. So this value is the actual last commanded temperature, the actively commanded temperature. Whether you did it down here, I see it's reflected up here, or you did it up here, they're slaved, they're the exact same variable. Okay, and cool down lets you stomp right on it. If you just want to cool everything down right away, instead of 2 clicks, it's 1 click. And fan speed seemed a logical place to put it. So this is your part cooling fan. You can turn it on to 100%. You can pick the number you prefer, or you can turn it off. All of that under manage heaters. And you still have the presets if you just want to use those. Yes, at some point I want to give you easier access to changing those values. Right now I have no idea how. I am learning Python as I go, plus I'm learning this application which I ported. I'm learning his software architecture, and then once in a while he uses some arcane Python programming trick that I don't understand, and I have to learn something first and then make a breakthrough and then figure out what I want to do. So it's a painfully slow process from my point of view, and clearly you're not getting video updates very often, so it's that much pain to you too, but help would be appreciated. So that's the prepare screen. Yes, we covered all of that. And print, I showed you at the get-go. Print right now is down to one button, and it simply says print the same thing you did last time. And that's what it'll do. I have no filament in my machine right now. I'm standing in the dark because I'm doing a video, and I'm hoping I don't hear a crashing noise from my printer. Okay, so I want to up my Z offset because I accidentally left it from the other screen at a value. You see what the values are. You notice it says disable the filament sensor. I can actually enable it. I can disable it. Each time I change it, the message tells me what I have done. I'm disturbed because I noticed it's already said disabled. I pushed disabled. It said, hey, I disabled it. Maybe there's something in my code that is not testing for something first. I can go look for that. But at least if it does that to you as well, enable it first and then disable. Just keep pushing that till you get the message you want. It will be in the state that it says. Now, feed rate. That's how much do you want to multiply all your speed factors by. So 100% instead of 1.0, it's the same thing. It's 100% feed rate, means exactly the feed rate you asked for, the speeds that you asked for in the slicer. If you want it to go faster, you tap that just like in the CF and you put in a different number, and poof, everything goes faster by that factor. So in this case 15% faster. Default is 100. Same thing with flow rate. I normally print my PLA at 94% flow in the slicer. So I set it to 100% here because I want 100% of the 94% to be used. You do a bit of math. If you decide, oh, suddenly I should be doing this at 92%, not 94, you can change this factor here by whatever the math tells you it should be, and it'll be less than 100%, right? Fan speeds, you can actually change it right there if you so wish. So if it turns out your slicer, let's say you're printing PETG and you forgot to change the print speed, the fan speed in your slicer, you can change it right there and you have control. Now, you can baby step the nozzle, so when you are actively printing, right now we're waiting for some temperatures. Okay? When you're actively printing, you can baby step the head up and down if you think you see the first layer needs it. You're too close or you're too far away, you can fix it on the fly. Same thing as baby stepping in Marlin. That's what that will do for you. If you change your mind about enabling the sensor, you can do that at any time in the print. But if you want to stop the print, you can't do that until it has drawn the purge line, or it is drawing the purge line. And that has something to do with something I don't know. Somewhere in between Klipper and the DGUS-Reloaded application, the machine can be in an unfortunate state when you try to run the cancel print macro and you get undesirable behavior. Like if it's headed for a homing, it will drill into the bed. So I have disabled both pause and stop, but the only way I could figure out to do that was after the fact of you confirming, yes, that's what I want to do, which is why I'm a tease. And I say, do you wanna? And you say yes, and I say, no, you can't. Okay? I only have 26 characters to work with, so I put NA, meaning not available, not applicable. But sorry for the ambiguity for those whose intuition always says NA is not applicable. So it's not available until it starts to draw the purge line, which it won't do until both the bed temperature and the nozzle temperature are at the target temperatures. I am homing the bed cold nozzle. I'm doing it on purpose because I'm tired of residue getting between the nozzle and the bed. Being warm enough to push through is not a cure. It doesn't stop the problem. You still end up with a difference between where Z equals 0 and where the nozzle thinks Z equals 0, because some residue of filament gets trapped, and the thickness of that residue is the difference between offset as the printer measured it and the correct offset as physics would have it. So I got sick of it. I stopped doing it. That means if you use my code, you have to adopt my workflow or live with the consequences. Okay, it's that simple. I have pulled filament out of my machine and fake printed things and still left traces on the bed because the nozzle was still melting what residue was left inside the nozzle and leaving it on my bed. It wasn't empty. The only way I know to level every time and to Z offset every time and to home every time without an error in the Z offset term due to filament residue is to run that with a cold nozzle. So that's what I'm doing to you and for you in my firmware. So right now it's still heating up the bed because the last thing I printed was a PETG model. It was 80 degrees C bed. It was 240 C nozzle. If I zero these things out, the wait command will never achieve its target and will just be stuck here forever. Now we have pause. So I can pause. You'll see the little line under there went to, sorry, I jumped because I got burned by the bed there in the dark. That little red line says you're on the screen now where you are paused. You'll see that change back to a very faint green. It might look white or yellow to you when I go back to print. So the red line is a reminder, hey, I'm not on the print screen anymore. Resume button only appears on the print paused menu. So that's a second clue that, hey, I'm not printing anymore. And the time stops ticking. Oh, go ahead, make a liar out of me. The time used to stop ticking. Time does not stop ticking either. You're on the paused screen. From here you can change any of these values. They're still available to you. You can change the status. It's still available to you. You can baby step if you like. There is a tune menu. On the tune menu you pretty much get the same controls you already had on the other screen, plus you can control the LED status. So yes, I am looking at why should it be redundant between the two. Right now it's there because these are placeholders to keep the tuning screen in the interface until I get to a more a larger number of controls, and there's no room for them on the front page, right? So it's basically a placeholder. In this particular case you have change filament, which you did not have on the print pause screen. I'll show you that in a minute, but this is unique to the resume pause screen. It's your chance, because when I run M600, the macro that you run when you want to change at layer, it will bring you to this screen. It'll bring you to the paused screen, and tune will bring you here, and you will be able to change your filament, put your new filament in, mess around with the temperatures as you wish. If you're doing strange things like using a different type of filament for the next layer, I'm not sure they adhere well. It's not a recommendation, but it's in a corner case you might find this useful. And then when you're done here, you get back to the resume screen. You have two options. You can cancel right now. You can go to stop. It'll say, do I stop the print? And if you say yes, it will cancel the print. Or you can come here and you can say, no, resume. It says, you sure? I say yes. Okay, I'm back. See, the red line's gone. It's back to a pale green. You're back to the printing screen. The time jumped to the new value. And you can tune from here too, but you cannot change filament from here because that would be nonsense while you're printing. Right? You'd have to stop printing to change your filament. So that's what the pause is for. If I push stop, it says, you sure? If I say no, it will keep printing. And if I say yes, that's what it'll do. It'll stop right there. It'll park my head. It'll present the print. It'll tell me I had all that time left to go, but that particular message is cleared out every 10 seconds. So whatever the last message is, if you didn't get around to reading it, it'll be gone. and you'll have to just wonder what it was or do the wrong thing a second time. But there you were. It said how much time you had left, because my Cura slicer has some code in it that I recommend to you in some comments just above the start print macro in printer.config. It says paste this stuff into the start G-code field of Cura, and as a result you'll get time remaining and which layer of how many layers am I printing alternating on the message line. I do find that sometimes when the layers are too close together, the time it takes to refresh the message is such that I never see the time remaining. I only ever see what layer I'm printing next. It's a race condition, so it'll vary with the models you're printing, but the design is that you get both of them, because M73 and M117 are both supported. So you've seen just about everything. You haven't seen the other Easter eggs. If you tap on the beta, it brings you some information about the machine and the firmware. I'm not going to apologize for these two values here. Those are DGUS. The DWin factory reads those numbers and gives you those values. I have no clue why those are the values, but so it is. The Klipper version here is the latest Klipper version. I cannot tell you whether it's truncated or not because I don't know. I suspect it is, because I think there should be more than 4 characters there. There's the build volume that you have in your printer config, so it's actually looking at min and max and doing the math. It's either 237, 237. So you can go to printer config to fix that if you see the wrong numbers here. And this is the name I typed in for my machine name in the DGUS-Reloaded config. So you can look there to see what's going on. If you tap the other Easter egg, which is the Klipper logo, it'll bring you to this screen. It won't leave you there very long, but if you're there and you push restart, it will actually restart the application. You notice that it went through the setup, and then Klipper caught up and it did it a second time. So what you saw there was the application restarted itself, and then Klipper restarted itself and restarted the application. So when you see printer ready, it says, okay, it's time to use the machine. I've done everything I'm going to. If you do the firmware restart, you'll see the same thing, but Klipper does a more rigorous reboot. There you go. I wish that was faster, but I can't talk any faster than that, and my brain wouldn't keep up with me if it did. So that's a quick look at the DGUS-Reloaded DWin set application and the DGUS-Reloaded Klipper software that I have uploaded under Thinker's Bluff's repositories. The Klipper component and the DWin set component are in separate repositories, cross-linked to each other. Have fun, good luck. I promise I'll get more information up there, but you've seen the pace at which I do that. I thought I'd better put this out because several people now have said, hey, what is it? You're still going to need some help to install it. I'm working on that. But this is your incentive, hopefully, or maybe disincentive. You know, if you've seen what you see and you think, who cares? That's okay too. I'm doing it for me, and I'm sharing it with you. So enjoy your machines. They're really wonderful machines. And if you need to move to Klipper, you don't have to trash the display. I've given you this option with DGUS-Reloaded to actually actively use it here at the machine where I'm standing, and not way over there where my laptop is, or way upstairs where the networked laptop is. This is a handy capability, I find anyway, to have right next to my machine. Talk to you soon. Bye bye.